Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ukrainian community of investment professionals, welcome everybody at the third Ukrainian Investment Forum by CFA Ukraine, which we called this year Rethinking the Future. As probably most of you know, my name is Ross, I'm the board member of CFA Ukraine, and today will serve as kind of MC. Before we start, I would like to say a special thank you to our team of volunteers. As you know, from the seed stage, CFA Ukraine was driven by a team of volunteers. So as far as this event is becoming annual, this automatically anticipates much more responsibility. So thank you very much to everyone, starting from the general manager, Maria, and to every single volunteer. Thank you very much for our sponsors, and thank you very much to all of you for your interest and for your participation in the event. Why rethinking the future? Well, this year was challenging for most of us. Global turbulence, weak macroeconomic data, lack of liquidity in the banking system, poor corporate governance, political issues. These are all the challenges we are facing every day. And eventually, we have to come up with something. So what's next? In my personal opinion, the best time to have this discussion is now. Now because of two reasons. Well, finally, parliament elections are over, and we had approximately a month to understand the alignment of forces in the new parliament. And secondly, today is, so we have exactly 1 month before the 21st of December, and you know what might happen according to the Mayan calendar. It's time to start. Let me invite three great individuals for the opening speech. Our special guest from Turkey, Attila Köksal, who is the board member at CFA Institute and managing partner at Standard & Securities in Turkey, which is one of the leading investment banking advisory company. After Attila, we will hear Andrei Bespyatov, who is the president of CFA Ukraine and also managing director of Ukrainian Investment Bank Dragon Capital. And finally, we will give a word to our principal sponsor, Baker Tilly Ukraine, represented by its managing partner, Alexander Pochkun. So thank you very much. Attila, welcome.
Thank you very much. I think I came the long way. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the third Ukrainian Investment Forum. My name is Attila Köksal. I am a CFA charter holder and a member of the CFA Institute board. First, I would also like to thank to the organizers, speakers, participants, and sponsors of this excellent event and venue on behalf of the CFA Institute. I would also like to thank the CFA Ukraine Society for inviting me to participate in this event. I am honored. And before being a board member, I was the society representative for the EMEA region of CFA Institute. So I remember the time when the Ukraine Society was being established, 2008, 2009. And I can comfortably say that in my region, the Ukraine Society was one of the better managed and fastest growing societies. So I congratulate all volunteers, the founders, the current society leaders for their efforts. And I am also somewhat jealous because they are catching up in numbers, the Turkish society. So when you give the microphone to a Turk, you should be prepared to listen to a long political speech. We like complaining about Middle Eastern politics. We like complaining about our neighbors, mostly Greeks and Syrians, sometimes as far as Israel. But today I won't speak about politics. I have about 7-8 minutes. So I'll talk about my experience in Turkey, what we lived, what we went through during 1980s to recent years, which is quite similar to what you are experiencing in Ukraine. So maybe we can draw some analogies there. And also I'll talk about what's going on in the financial industry and try to convey CFA Institute's messages to financial sector participants, to finance professionals, I think almost 50% of the audience works directly in the finance industry, and the rest is also very related to the finance industry. So this is what I'll be talking about. Well, I am an investment banker from Turkey, and like most of you, I spent most of my career in an emerging market. So when I started, the Istanbul Stock Exchange was just being established. This is mid-1980s. So I had the chance of seeing and the growth, first the establishment, then the growth, and also several failures of an emerging country capital markets. I'm sure you experience the same things here in Ukraine. As some of you may know, in 1980s and 1990s, the Turkish economy struggled with high inflation, as we did in 1990s. For 20 years, we had 50, 60, 70, 80% inflation. I think 1990s, like 10-year average was 76%. We've seen a crowding out of government securities, interest rates, overnight rates as high as 10,000%. I know this is not too shocking for you, but you know, when I would say this in the US or in Europe, you know, people would go, really, they would be surprised. And real interest rates hovered around 20 to 30% for almost 20 years. And besides that, we had terrorism across the country, and also several acts of God, like earthquakes that disrupted the economy and the daily life. So having struggled with such negative factors for more than 2 decades, we found ourselves in the middle of a major financial crisis in 2001. It wiped out more than 1/3 of the Turkish banking sector. Several companies and individuals went bankrupt. And this was a Turkey-specific crisis, so we didn't get much help from abroad, only a standby facility from the IMF. But unlike the countries in crisis today, especially the European ones, we had control of our own currency and fiscal system. So what we did was, we devalued our currency, we increased the interest rates to attract foreign capital, even though short term, and we increased taxes dramatically to boost public revenues. But of course, all Turkish people became poorer overnight, and we felt deeply the effects of the crisis. And as a result of the crisis, the Turkish government lost the trust of the business circles and also the trust of the society. Social tension escalated. Bankers, as usual, became the scapegoats of the crisis. Most of them were jailed. Well, some of them were jailed, not most. Some of them were jailed, but most of them lost their jobs. I believe the 2001 crisis was a turning point in Turkey's history. Because before the crisis, our country was run by coalition government led by inept leaders. And this period corresponds to the period where emerging markets such as Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, China, South Africa, have grown steadily, but we lost those 20, 25 years because the country wasn't managed properly. Following the 2001 shock, we restructured our financial system. The establishment was wiped out, and old politicians were sent out of the system, and single-party government finally took office. And since then, since 2001, our economy prospered, while our GDP tripled by growing every year since 2001, except for 2008. I think our GDP growths are quite similar, Turkey's and Ukraine's. You had a decline in 2009, we had a decline in 2008, but other than that, both countries showed similar growths. Today, our financial system is very solid, with all Turkish banks in sound financial condition. Between 2003 and 2012, we got 9 times more foreign investment than between 1923, the establishment of the Turkish Republic, to 2003. So 80 years, we almost got nothing. But after the crisis, after restructuring ourselves, we started getting more and more investments. So today, Turkey is one of the most favored investment venues for foreign institutional investors. So it all sounds so good, right? But unfortunately not, because the macroeconomy is in great shape, but we are facing difficulties in increasing the capital market investors. You face the same problem here. Our savings rate and local capital formation rate is quite low. Local institutional investor base is almost non-existent. Our institutional investors, the size of our funds to our GDP is less than 1%. And also, would you believe if I told you that out of 70 million people, only 250,000 people have equity investments of 5,000 euros or more? 70 million, 250,000. So this leaves us with a major current account deficit problem, and also we have to rely on foreign funding for growth. So this is for Turkey. And the truth is that our profession has lost much of its good standing and public respect, not only in Turkey, but globally. There has been a prolonged period where our industry has forgotten what it takes to maintain the trust of clients, regulators, and the public as a whole. Today, the investment profession stands at a crossroad. The painful truth is that people don't trust financial services. The Edelman Trust Barometer, you may have heard of it, it's an annual survey that measures the public's confidence in professionals, reports that banking and financial services are the 2 least trusted sectors globally. They are at the very bottom of the list. By the way, at the top is the technology sector. So I've seen that survey, and it really makes you think. And our topic today is rethinking the future, so I think this should be our starting point. And another study, more than 3/4 of people responding to a CNN poll said that financiers are greedy and overpaid, and 2/3 said that they are dishonest. So I don't think we are happy of hearing that as finance professionals here. And members of CFA Institute feel strongly about this as well. In this year's member survey, 90% of our members agreed that investor trust in finance industry has been diminishing in recent years. We are all tired of reading headlines about insider trading, hedge funds gone wrong, Ponzi schemes, and brokerage firms losing their clients' deposit. For us professionals, it's getting more and more difficult to explain our clients that our firm is different from those making the headlines. And we are also worried that regulations designed to catch the bad guys will make it impossible for us to focus on investing and working with clients. It's a fact that today the world needs CFA Institute-like establishments more than ever. As I tried to depict with the Turkish examples, crises do come and go, economies do recover, but it is very difficult to restore trust. You can restore an economy within a few years, but to reestablish trust might take decades. Myself and my colleagues here in CFA Ukraine Society are proud members of our organization, the CFA Institute, which since its establishment in 1947 placed the integrity of our profession and the interest of clients above its members' interest and never compromised on ethics. The mission of the CFA Institute is to lead the investment profession globally by setting the highest standard of ethics, education, and professional excellence. This commitment enhances the CFA designation and its reputation. Dear finance professionals in this audience, now time has come for every one of us to step forward with a bolder voice for professional ethics. Members of CFA Institute have always had to conform to a robust code of ethics, but these times call for us to step up more visibly. We should all get involved by promoting ethics training for all professionals in our respective countries and companies. So, the future of our profession rests on you and me taking professional responsibility to restore trust. Your bolder voice and your actions will inspire your colleagues to higher standards. Your inspired colleagues and your firm can help lead the industry. An industry that earns society's trust can make the world a better place. Is it naive to think that personal responsibility can change the world? To answer, I leave you with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. If you want to change the world, you must begin with yourself. You must first become the change that you want to see in the world. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference. And Mr. MC, may I invite, Now I'd like to invite the president of the CFA Ukraine Society, Mr. Andriy Bespiatov, for his speech.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you here on our third Ukrainian Investment Forum, Rethinking the Future. I want to thank you, all of you, for participation, and my special thanks to our speakers. I think with your help we will do a great event today. I think that we see the popularity of such event. I think this is a unique event for this country. For this time, what we saw, the number of registrations this year, we saw over 500 people, and we see it's growing. We're quite young, as was mentioned. So for the last 3 years, we're growing probably by 100 registrations every year. So it's quite impressive trend that we see. So I think it's a quite unique event because currently we have some specialized event, maybe it's targeted to have maybe some CFOs, IR, PR people, but maybe some industries. But such a general talk, it's kind of unique. Good question. Who we are and why we do that. Briefly, my colleagues introduced. I think most of you know already because we do it not the first year, but still we exist for less than 4 years now. We are still quite young, but hopefully growing and hopefully will grow fast in the future. Currently, about CFA Ukraine is about 100 members, and we have a quite active small group of volunteers. And from myself personally, I want to thank all of them one more time for a great effort for doing this event today, and special thanks to Maria Barabash for great efforts about that. So the reason why we do it is pretty much the same reason why many other societies, our partners throughout the world, CFA societies, currently there are almost 140 societies globally, uniting almost 110,000 people, professionals, investment professionals, and many of them do well, maybe not that large, but still large events. And the reason for that is quite simple. We want to create a network of professionals. This is a part of our mission. As my colleague Attila said, it's a part of our mission to promote ethics, but also to promote education and to promote professional excellence. So I think if we have these next, 9-10 hours to discuss some problems that the country faces, maybe to find some solutions, or maybe just to think about something would provide a kind of value-added, useful time that you can spend here in addition to your networking that you will certainly will be doing here. So what is the topic that we are discussing today? We decided that we expanded this year and we'll cover also the global markets, and the reason was quite simple. It would be probably too ideal to think about Ukraine as an isolated market, and we see now what's going on globally. We see a number of major global concerns that are covered in global media and global analytics. That includes, first of all, for example, the United States, and with the famous so-called fiscal cliff. We have a lot of discussions about hard or soft landing of the second largest economy in the world, of China. A lot of discussion going on for the last few years about European crisis, and as you probably saw in the latest statistics based economic decline, we see pretty much a recession in Europe and Japan. And for Ukraine, it's all quite important because Ukraine is a very open economy. As you probably know, that external trade of Ukraine is pretty much the size of the whole economy, almost 100%. If you compare that with China, for example, then the share of trade in foreign trade in GDP would be about 50%. For Russia, it would be probably a little bit over 40%. So we depend a lot on what's going on globally. Maybe we are not so much dependent from developments in Europe. We are less linked to trade with Europe. For example, Ukraine exports goods maybe 20% less of total goods export to Western Europe. If you compare that with Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, the share would be 60, 70, 80%. But still, we are working in a global environment. Our trade, financial and other flows are so dependent with global environment that without understanding what's going on, it would be impossible to move on with the local economy. And what we also see, because of all those major global concerns, we see that the business climate and business confidence is at quite low levels. I just recently saw statistics that was shown by the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he showed that the business climate, business confidence now, even if it's better than it was at its bottom in July 2012, is still very low. It's on the level of the last time it was on that level about 15, 16 years ago. So what that means that many companies just stay away and do not invest in development. For example, in the United States, the average share of cash that companies keep, the share of cash in terms of share of total assets is now at historical high of about 11-12%, which historically, I think this is the largest amount for the last 30-40 years probably, which is the normal level would be maybe 5-6%. I did the same calculations for Ukraine. The situation is probably more stable here. In 2007, before the crisis, in 2011, the share of cash and assets of pretty much all companies in Ukraine was quite almost flat, about 10%. But still we depend, if you look, and I'm sure you read papers or look for numbers, the famous European business associations, they calculate the quarterly investment attractiveness index, and you probably saw that in the third quarter it was the lowest since the inception of this index in 2008. So we have, coming from global to local, we see a number of issues that we'll have to discuss. With the local economy, we'll be discussing what's going on now with the economy and what do we expect in the future. We think, well, I personally think 2012 was a special year, not only because of global concerns, but also because of some local events. I mean, unique, we had Euro 2012, we had parliamentary elections, so altogether it was a specific year, and currently with some estimations of economic growth this year, maybe 0, maybe 1%, we are below than many of developed markets and definitely below the emerging markets average of about probably 5% growth. So what we should expect in the future, for the consensus forecast would be probably 4 or 5% in a long-term growth that we can achieve. Possible or not, we will probably discuss it during our economic panel today. Another number that came out to me that this year, the GDP per capita, the size of the economy per each of us, will be about $4,000, and this will be the first year when we pass the level of 2008. So it took the Ukrainian economy 4 years to pass the crisis that we went through in 2008, 2009. So it's a good point where we go. What we're thinking now, where we will be going in the next few years. And if you look back for the last decade, in 10 years, the GDP per capita went up from $700, $800, $900 per capita to $4,000 per capita. So can we do the same? Like, can we grow with the same pace within the next years? Well, it's a good question. Probably it will be hardly achievable. Currently, we are number 104 globally in terms of this measure, and we in terms of another ranking doing business, we are number 137, so we still have a lot of room hopefully to grow and not to go down. Another question that everyone is asking now is what's going on with hryvnia, so where the local currency will be going in the now, tomorrow, maybe in half a year. People familiar with finance industry, they watch for non-deliverable forwards on hryvnia and see how it's on which levels it is staying now. So probably it's another question that's being asked pretty much every day. At least I see this question every day. So, but besides the economy, we'll have, I'm sure, 3 wonderful and serious panels on business environment. That will be talking about debt and how sources of financing, how to attract public or private equity, how to attract debt. I think it's a big question in all. We have a lot of problems in all 3 areas, and I'm sure have opportunities also. So the question, if we have IPO or private placement markets still alive or not, if not, or suspended, when it can recover, the situation with the private equity, how active it is or how it can be developed. The debt market is also, is it dead or is it active? Will it develop? What is the pace? Can you do bonds? Can you do debt? Can you do it locally? Can you do it foreign? We'll probably have, we'll also discuss some quasi-macro, quasi-corporate issues, for example, like gas, which is, well, currently mostly it's even a political issue also, because Ukraine is probably the most inefficient, or among the most inefficient gas consumers in the world. So overall, we have a quite long agenda, but I think for the next 8, 9, 10 hours, it should be quite helpful. I think the major thing for me as a target why I'm doing this as a volunteer would be to bring new information, maybe not even those information, but food for thoughts for me and for you. And this is number 1. And number 2 would be to give you a probably great platform, opportunity for networking. I think this is a unique place, and I really hope that in this place we'll have a very great time, very productive, informative, and useful. So thank you once again, and welcome on our conference. Thank you. And let me introduce our next speaker, Alexander Pachkun, who is a managing partner of our general sponsor, Baker Tilly. Thank you.
Morning. If you allow me, I speak in Russian because I think it's more common language for the audience. Доброе утро. Я постараюсь говорить недолго, потому что мы уже за рамками. Мне не надо рассказывать о текущей ситуации в мире. не надо представлять страну, и большинству не надо представлять нашу компанию. Поэтому я хочу сказать следующее, что мы живем в очень интересное время. Именно в это время, наверное, как никогда в другое, проявляется творческое начало вашей профессии. Согласитесь, больше нужно творчество для того, чтобы найти финансирование, чем для того, чтобы его просто распределить. Поэтому я рад, что такие мероприятия проходят и что мы находим возможность их поддерживать, потому что это хорошее место для того, чтобы поделиться идеями. Я уверен, что именно в это время, в таких экономических условиях, профессия требует от вас нестандартных подходов и нестандартных решений в поисках того же самого финансирования, в управлении компанией, управлении финансами компании. Это все усложняется тем, что если мы возьмем, не могу не сказать о финансовой отчетности, если мы возьмем финансовую отчетность, то, к сожалению, она не успевает на сегодняшний день за темпом развития экономики, за темпами принятия решений, и очень часто она просто становится таким тикнутым боксиком в чек-листе требуемых документов. И именно ваша роль заключается в том, чтобы, скажем, информацию пользователю доставлять быстрее, качественней, с пониманием, знанием и делом. Идеи. Я надеюсь, что их здесь будет много высказано, но прошу вас всегда помнить, что если у вас их недостаток, мы всегда готовы ими поделиться. Помните, что в 125 странах более 22 тысяч профессионалов готовы работать для вас. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you very much, Attila. Thank you very much, Alexander. So now, before we start the first panel, let me tell you a little bit about the outstanding feature of this year's forum. What we've been talking about in 2012 was actually macro, politics, and again macro. So that's why we decided to do this innovation and to divide macro panel into two parts. The subject is the same, Ukrainian economy, macro situation, but we will look at it from global point of view and from local point of view. So the first panel is Ukrainian economy global outlook. This will start shortly. We will speak about US presidential elections, QE3, QE4, QE5, global flow of capital from developed markets to emerging markets and vice versa. Outlook for stocks, equities, commodities, the prospects of Eurozone and Euro, and how this all interacts with Ukraine and our needs. And what would happen in the local section of macro panel, I will tell you immediately after the coffee break. So please welcome our speakers today. Attila Kaksal kindly agreed to join our macro panel. Again, he's the board member at CFA Institute and managing director at Turkish investment bank Standard Ünlü Securities. Also welcome Igor Shumilo, director of economic research at the International Center for Policy Studies. Please welcome John Patton, head of origination in Russia CIS at Deutsche Bank. And finally, Pavlo Sheremeta, recently elected president of the Kyiv School of Economics. So I'm passing the word to Andrei Bespyatov, who will be a moderator in this panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. As most of my guests speak English, I'll probably speak English also. Oops. Just a second. Okay, thank you very much, and it's my honor to be a moderator on such a great panel, and I'll probably spend a few more minutes introducing our great speakers. I think we have a few minutes for that. So, as you know, in addition to being a board member, I'll go from left to right. In addition to being a board member of CFA Institute, Mr. Attila Koksal is also a managing partner of the leading investment bank in Turkey. And in addition to that, he was membering as a board member in several Turkish corporations and financial institutions, including the Istanbul Stock Exchange, Turkey Derivative Exchange, Association of Capital Market Intermediaries, and the Corporate Governance Association of Turkey. And before becoming a managing partner in Standard & Poor's Securities, and together with that experience, Mr. Koksal has almost 30 years experience in the industry. So I'm very much sure he will help with his experience, not only about Turkey, but about regional economy and maybe some global views. Mr. Igor Anatolovich Shumila, I think you well know this person, and currently he's a director of the think tank, one of the best known think tank in this country, the International Center for Policy Studies. But we also know that for many years, from 2003 to 2012, Mr. Shumila was the executive director for economics and the member of the governing board of the National Bank of Ukraine. So the person with the experience in macroeconomic of this country for 40 years, really my honor to sit on the same panel with this person. Mr. Pavlo Sheremet is another great speaker, and currently he is a dean as a president for Kiev School of Economics. And before he was, I think he was also on vice chair of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Ukraine. He's teaching leadership and strategy in many universities, leading universities in Europe and Asia. He was also previously the president and the Institute Senior Fellow on the Malaysia Blue Ocean Strategy Institute. He was a founding dean for Kyiv Mogila Business School. He was also previously the MBA program director for International Management Institute and the project manager of the Open Society Institute in Budapest. And he was previously mentioned, ranked among the top best managers in Ukraine. And currently he's studying, he actually with education in Harvard Business School, INSEAD, Blue Ocean Strategy, China European. So a lot of that. I think we can do it for a long time. And finally, our last but not least speaker, John Patton. He is the head of origination in Russia CIS Deutsche Bank. Before Deutsche Bank, he was a director for CIS and emerging markets at Merrill Lynch, and working previously at Credit Suisse First Boston, at one of the largest European Wi-Fi networks, cloud networks, and also a founder of chairman of the Initiative Foundation, which develops the technology. So we have a great team, and I suggest we start with a simple question, but probably the most difficult one. When, just maybe a few minutes per each person, when do you think the crisis will end? I mean, the global one. So I think we can start with Mr. Attila Koksal. Thank you.
Okay. That's a very tough question, and I am the first speaker to elaborate on that. Honestly, I don't know. And if anybody says, I don't know, if anybody has any ideas here, I would really appreciate that, but nobody knows. So it's a crisis that nobody has seen before. It's deep crisis, wide crisis, and honestly, it's very difficult to see the end of the tunnel. So instead of maybe trying to answer the question of when the crisis will end, maybe we should ask to ourselves, what should we do to survive in this crisis? Because, you know, being from Turkey, I told you, you know, we lived 20 years, 25 years in crisis. So from day one I started. You know, I started in mid-1980s. And I think 3-4 months later I was working in Citigroup in Treasury Department. And we had a major devaluation of, I think, 20 to 25% overnight. So, and since then, you know, we've been coping with these crises. But I think, you know, you can live in crisis, you can survive in crisis, because if you don't take enormous risks, and if you manage your balance sheet, manage your exposure quite well, you can survive. So, you know, again, I mean, I don't think the audience will maybe like my answer, but honestly, I don't have an answer. But I would just recommend caution because this crisis might take much longer than we envision it. I hope it doesn't take as long as 25 years as it did in Turkey.
Thank you very much. Mr. Шуміла, ви можете щось додати на цей план?
Мені здається, що насправді у всіх є чітке розуміння, що навіть дна ще можливо немає відчуття, що дно досягнуто. І от це відчуття, можливо, є найбільш негативним, бо очікування зараз від поганого до гіршого. І от як дуже люблять американці, кажуть, там є дві новини. От якщо зараз питати, то можна, ну я б сказав так, є дві новини. Одна погана і друга дуже погана. Так, і в таких очікуваннях насправді ми всі живемо. Дуже погано, що насправді відсутнє лідерство і, на жаль, і групи країн, як Європейський Союз чи зона євро. Можливо, американці більш чітко вже визначилися своєю політикою, яким чином вони будуть вирішувати проблему двойних дисбалансів. І хоча ситуація знов може виникнути ті чи інші проблеми, бо я думаю, що всі пам'ятають 2007 рік. І, можливо, вже, ну, я можу сказати, що в мене тоді було відчуття, що такої кризи, яка відбулася в 2008-му, не буде. А виявилася ця бульбашка, яка розірвалася. І саме, можливо, ще головне, що немає довіри, якщо там є серед питань, це наш регіон, немає довіри до вартості активів в національній валюті. Але з другого боку, я тут повністю погоджуюсь з словами, що це якраз той час, коли є речі, про які вже можна казати як позитивні. Ну, можливо, це буде наступне питання, але щоб не дуже забирати час, я ще б хотів би насправді сказати, і є позитивні речі.
Дуже дякую. Павло?
Well, my answer to the question when will the crisis end is never. So let's be ready for it. And it's good that we are living in this crisis already for, what, 25 years? I think the crisis is here since 1988, and we almost got used to it. So for the time being, and for the lifetime of our generation, the crisis will not end. And the reason for that is the following. I think one of the key reasons for this crisis is North America and Western Europe getting used to living in the Asian century. And the Asian century has just started, you know, it's just the first 12 years. It's getting used to the competition with China, with South Africa, South Africa is yet to come, by the way, South Korea, in a way, Japan, and other tigers. And more tigers to come. India will come in a much greater scale to the world market. Indonesia and other big nations. So there will be, and by the way, China will get used to, hopefully, to democracy, and how it will go through this experience is another big question. So more crises ahead. That's why I'm living with three very kind of simple ideas: expect nothing, blame nobody, and do something. And the final thing that I would like to say in positive, as Ihor mentioned, about the crisis, is that there is no single monument to the military general who was a military general in the peacetime. Okay, there's no single monument. So all the monuments are to the military generals who were generals during the wartime. So crisis is good in a way.
Thank you. John?
I guess I would answer the question by saying what I would tell a potential client really about their approach to the market or something like that, because I'm myself not an academic economist like some of our panel members, and I think sometimes the idea of a crisis is we can get too into the details of the major trends that are going on around us, but actually in everyday life as a company, you're thinking about how to raise money or what's the right way to manage your risks and that sort of thing. So that's kind of more from my angle. I would agree very much that the end of the crisis is probably the wrong question. The right question is more what actions to take in the midst of a changing world, as Pavlo just said, certainly. And I'm not sure it's so much about crisis, again, as it is about competition. And in this case, for the companies in Ukraine, it's about competition for capital around the world. And in many cases, where we were 5 or 6 years ago, if you looked at Ukraine in the context of emerging Europe, you'd have said that it was one of the major growth markets of the region, and very interesting, even though there were many uncertain risks that were still being worked out in the legal system and that sort of thing. But today, there are so many more asset choices for investors to look at when they come into any market. So Ukraine is not only competing with the likes of India and China for trade and you know, all those issues at that level, but on the level of investment dollars, it's also competing quite aggressively. So with that context in mind, I guess I would say that the situation to me in the U.S., for example, is beginning to improve. I think the election and the result of the negotiations of the fiscal cliff, which are ongoing at the moment, will likely lead to some better stability in the U.S. in the next year. And I agree with this point. Deutsche Bank believes that the market will improve as the year goes on next year, and I think in part because the uncertainty that we've had has been fairly fundamental and unusual in the U.S., for example. And once the fiscal cliff negotiations make some progress, it's unlikely they'll be perfect, but there'll be some progress before the end of the year. I think the market will start to digest that, and the situation there will be better. I think at the same time, our view as a firm, Deutsche Bank again, is that China will not have a hard landing and will be actually already improving in the fourth quarter. So next year should be better for China. So if you look at different parts of the world, there are certainly some positive signs. That doesn't mean that we're going to have, you know, global growth of 5–6% again for some time. It's going to be lower levels of growth. There's much more leverage than there was in the system before, and Europe will continue to be a drag on global growth. Full stop. So if I'm a company thinking about when to raise capital, I think next year will be a better year for raising capital. I think the problem we have now in terms of capital markets is that the first quarter, the April 2013, there will be 20 companies that would like to raise capital. So there's a lot of backlog, especially coming from Ukraine and Russia. But for example, I think there'll be opportunities and windows next year in April and September and during the course of next year.
May I just make a comment on Pavlo's? I really like the general analogy. You know, it's nice to have your statue, but also we have to keep in mind that some generals die young at war times.
Okay, may I expand and ask an additional question to John? So if you expect it to be a better year next year, maybe what's the view of the bank on next year growth numbers? If you think that US is going to be doing good, what do you think will be that? And do you expect more activity to come from, I mean, Ukraine, Russia, or what countries, regions you expect to be more active next year? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how to answer the active point. I think the idea is that the U.S. is stabilized, and there's a number of things. There's more deleveraging that's happened in the U.S. so far compared to Europe, anyway. There's a tremendous boom that will begin to create some momentum around cheap energy. And oddly, in the U.S. at the moment, the price of gas is significantly less than it is in Europe because of the shale gas and shale oil boom. There are some people who suggest that the U.S. will be energy independent by 2020. I know that's something Ukraine would love to be. And maybe shale here will have the same turn, but it seems to be at the moment that the pricing of oil and gas has driven some serious innovation in that, and that will feed into, not immediately, and that's going to take some time, but those kind of dynamics are positive for the U.S. I don't know. It's difficult in Ukraine because, as you know, Ukraine is between, as it were, a rock and a hard place at the moment, between Russia and Europe. But you know, I think that there's some positive signs in Ukraine as well, and I think it just depends quite a bit on you know, the government's ability to continue to follow through on some of the things that they've promised in the past, and I think there is a concern in Ukraine with regards to Ukraine around corruption, which I think is a fact, and that's something the government needs to deal with, and is a concern for investors, and I think something that will be a drag on investment here for some time.
Я теж хотів би додати коментар, бо я сам вживав словосполучення погано, там дуже погано. Можливо, варто мати на увазі, що йде річ, що ті прогнози, да, які були в кінці минулого року, на цей рік, чи на 2013, практично всіма аналітиками становляться гіршими. Прогнози на наступний рік, які робилися ще квартал тому, робляться гіршими. Але з другого боку, насправді більшість, да, тим не менше, бачить наступний рік з точки зору економічного зростання чи економічного відновлення, в тому числі тих регіонах, які вже і тих країнах, і тих бізнесах, які мають чіткі програми і не просто їх проголосили, а їх реалізовують, і довіра до них якраз зростає. Насправді, декілька місяців тому, я думаю, всі звернули увагу на оцінку, яку зробив Міжнародний валютний фонд, який сказав, що якщо це не буде робитися, то можливо і падіння в наступні 12 місяців чи 4 квартали європейської економіки на 5%. І оця загроза, вона або відсувається, або наближується. Да? І це той світ, да, і ті очікування, в якому ми живемо. Але надія, як завжди, вмирає останньою, і тому надія на те, що далі буде краще, ніж воно зараз є, мені здається, все ж таки насправді є.
Then maybe a question is we come into Europe, maybe the question would be, do you think that Europe is solving the problems or is just postponing and delaying some bad things going forward? No, maybe Pavlo, you can have a view on that.
Well, coming from Asia and working for 3 years and 2 months there, and I was working in the Korean environment because my fellow co-workers and my boss was Korean. The boss was Professor Chen Kim, who is the co-author of Blue Ocean Strategy. They have a pretty good laugh when they hear about 35-hour work week in France and when they hear about 5-week vacations. They just have a very good laugh, you know, maybe a little bit with envy. Because it's unimaginable, for example, in South Korea. It's unimaginable in China. It's unimaginable in Singapore. It's unimaginable in Taiwan, in Japan. 2 weeks at most. You know, when I took stupid me, took a 3-week vacation, at first, you know, and it's Asia, you know, they are not so direct. So I just started to feel kind of strange glances. I realized that I'm no longer sitting to the right hand from the professor. I'm sitting something like four seats away. So I said, like, what's going on? And a good Korean friend told me, Pablo, you know, we don't take 3-week vacations. 3 weeks, you know, not 5 weeks. So going back to Ukraine, I cut it short just to 10 days. So the issue in Europe, of course, is a strong region. It's 500 million something people. It's one of the biggest regions in the world, of course. But Europe, especially the European Union, has to get used to competing with Asia. And for that, they just need to go back to the values that they had back in the 18th, 19th century when the Industrial Revolution was there. That's the factor number one. Number two, it's good to have you here on this panel as well, because I'm saying that hopefully in 10 or 15 years, Turkey and Ukraine hopefully will make European Union much more dynamic because of our markets, because of our market size, because of hopefully the dynamism that we actually see now in Turkey but not in Ukraine yet. Hopefully we will have it in 10 or 15 years that will make the European Union actually much more dynamic and able to compete with Asia in the future.
Okay, so let me probably expand on that and ask Attila, what do you think? Europe needs Turkey or Turkey needs Europe?
Well, maybe both. Same thing applies to Ukraine as well. But Turkey is a high-growth country. It's a young country. We are 70 million people, and 50% of our population is below the age of 30. So unlike our European counterparts, it's a young and growing economy, and they need Turkey as a market. They need Turkey as a hub, also to reach the region, to Middle East, as an export base and what have you. Of course, there are negative parts to having Turkey as a European member, because then they'll be neighboring Syria, Iraq, Iran, all these problem countries. And also, us being a Muslim country, I think, played a major role of the dislike of some members in the European Union. So, but we struggled hard to get into European Union. I mean, we've done our homework. We really changed our infrastructure, our legal infrastructure, and made a lot of reforms. But now, most of the Turkish public is not for joining the European Union anymore, having seen what happened there, because it's like a coherent body. Of course, it has very strong countries in it, but unfortunately, it has also very weak countries in it, and we are not sure whether we want to be part of it or not. And also, as I said in my speech, being independent, we had control of our own currency and our fiscal system. So in Greece or in Portugal, Spain, they cannot take the measures that they would normally take. Maybe they would take that, just devaluing your currency and increasing the interest rates and doing whatever you can to get foreign attraction to your country, because you are in the Eurozone and you borrow in euros and your money is euro, so you can't devalue it. So that's also something that we should all consider before joining.
I would probably add here that even if, for example, Latvia have a step from euro, still thinking if they want to do it or not, it's a good thing to think about what's going on and what will be the future of euro. So I have let's call it personal question for each of you. So do you have savings in euro, and do you plan to reduce them or to increase them? Yeah, maybe John, because it's natural that you have it in euro.
No, I have zero savings in euro, and I'm not going to increase them.
I prefer euro liabilities. But then again, of course, when speaking of currencies, I started as a foreign exchange trader years ago, and over the years I've seen that no one can predict where the currencies will go. Every year, still, I am reading research reports of almost all top institutions, Merrill Lynch's and Deutsche's and Goldman's and Credit Suisse's, what have you. Please do that. I mean, Reuters makes a poll, so go into Reuters, I'm sure some of you do it, and check the forecasts, year-end forecasts of major financial institutions for currencies. For euro, you'll most likely see variations from 135 to 1, and everything in between. And every year, maybe one or two companies by chance, happen to guess, but the following year they can. So it's impossible to predict the currencies. And are we talking about a weak euro and a strong dollar against a strong dollar, or which is worse, right? I think that's the name of the game. Not which is stronger, but which is worse. Considering the situation of the US dollar, if it appreciates against euro, is it getting stronger, or is euro getting weaker, or vice versa?
Можливо, тут, мабуть, немає політиків, але у нас дуже часто політики використовують існуючі проблеми євро для того, щоб давати оцінку і цивілізаційним виборам. Тому мені здається, ну, а інші, коли кажуть, от нам би такі проблеми, як євро, при нашому ВВП, доходах і населення і інше. Але коли ми говоримо Європа, да, весь час, ну, якби відноситься потім до країн зони євро. Да. Хоча зрозуміло, що там є і Польща, да, яка показала певно, і є Угорщина, свопи на суверенний дефолт, які зовсім інші, да, і є ціла низка країн. Чому я ще раз попросив слово? Бо насправді в копенгагенських критеріях, да, які до нових членів, є дуже часто перша фраза, яку знову полюбляють українські політики, там вона кажуть, другий факт, ринкова економіка, і забувають про продовження цього критерію. Ринкова економіка, яка спроможна витримати тиск конкуренції. І от зараз, насправді, питання для зони євро, наскільки вона, і для всієї Європи, наскільки вона спроможна витримати тиск глобальної конкуренції. І дуже добре дослідження, яке провели турецькі дослідники по оцінці політики і фіскальної політики, бо серед інших питань було там фіскальна консолідація для країн і для України. Питання полягає в тому, що коли Європа починала зростання, да, і Німеччина, вони мали 25-30% перерозподілу через бюджет. Накопичене багатство дозволило підняти соціальні стандарти. Але на прикладі Швеції вони навіть показували, що як тільки країна втрачала конкурентну спроможність, вона повинна була давати більше свободу приватному бізнесу, більше ринку, і тільки на основі відновлення економічного зростання підвищувати соціальні стандарти. На жаль, і Україна, дуже багато східноєвропейських країн йдуть по шляху. От ми досягли європейських критеріїв. У нас через бюджет перерозподіляється 50%, а в Швеції 70%. Так давайте ж ще більше збільшувати, да, оцю частку перерозподілу. Тому якби відомі всі рецепти, да, але чи хватить політичної мужності лідерам, да, і країнам зробити оці непопулярні кроки і для Європи? Ну, це насправді є складне питання, але мені здається краще, коли на нього будуть відповідати європейці.
I was just going to add to your question originally, just that the euro-dollar this year has been flat in terms of return, completely flat, zero return. So I think it's a relative value question a bit. I mean, if you look at all the risks in the world, there have been quite a bit. There have been U.S. risks, there have been European risks, there have been all over the place. So I think, you know, as this crisis evolves rather than finishes, I think we'll see differentiation. And to me, the place where there's the most risk in the next 12 months and the next 24 months is still Europe. So I suspect the dollar may outperform a bit. Not to make any predictions, but it's just a natural thought to say that, I mean, if you read The Economist this week, you can read about France. I mean, that's one perspective, but there's a whole set of questions around different countries in Europe that we haven't completely been through yet. So it seems to me that there are more risks in Europe than the rest of the developed world still to work through.
And also the foreign exchange investors, well, let's call them investors, have been neglecting countries like Canada and Australia for a while, you know, and these are very strong currencies. And I think just recently, last week, as early as last week, the World Bank announced them as reserve currencies. I don't know what it means. Like, if World Bank announces as a reserve currency, do they become reserve currency and people invest in them? I don't know, but one should also, you know, because in forex trading, most of the trade goes between US dollars and euros, right? That's where most of the bulk of the trades are there. So also Asian currencies and Canadian and Australian currencies are worth considering going forward, because as I said, which one is weaker, US dollar, euro? I think they are both hot potatoes.
So you mentioned just France. Do you think there could be other targets for, I don't know, third, fourth wave of European crisis, and especially not about France, but do you think there is a risk that it can expand on Central Eastern Europe, I don't know, Poland, Czech Republic, and so on, which are closer to us, or the risk is lower in in that respect. The question is probably to Mr. Shumila and Pavlo, pretty much to everyone, because everyone is involved here.
Well, I mean, look, as Attila mentioned, and I like this phrase, Turkey did a homework before it became a magnet for the investment. Ukraine, to be honest, didn't do the homework yet. We still have to do this. Poland seemed to be, yes. I mean, they at least are doing the homework. It was actually quite fun to see the ads. I mean, if you didn't invest into eastern Poland, which is quite close, by the way, talk to your psychiatrist or something. And the ads were in Dubai. They're being run on the major global media. So Poland is doing quite a good job. The other countries in Central and Eastern Europe will have to catch up. I think it's at the moment, Estonia is doing a very good job too, but Estonia is just too small, as well as Slovenia. Slovenia is doing a good job, but it's too small, 2 million people. Poland is fine, is a leader, and I think it should become a leader for Ukraine the way the Singapore acts as a leader, as a benchmark, for example, for Malaysia. Working as a consultant for the Malaysian government, I knew that the last argument you want to make is to say that, look, Singapore already did it. Because then they become really emotional, and finally they do it. because Singapore used to be part of Malaysia. They're very emotional about it, but then they copy it. So for example, when Malaysia ended up in the top 20 as a globally competitive nation, they were so happy about it until they learned that Singapore is #1. So they said, okay, there's a place to grow. Ukraine should have the same ambition. Ukraine should have the benchmarks like Poland in terms of growth. For example, the fact that Poland never had a recession even in 2008 is quite an amazing fact. We had like what, minus 15% or something. So that's something to learn.
Насправді увага була привернута до країн Іспанії, Греції, Португалії, Іспанії, Італії, але останні дані показують, що зараз невирішеність ситуації, відсутність цієї стратегії, затримки з її реалізації, вони призводять до того, що починається з певним лагом процес впливу вже на економіки Франції, Німеччини, тобто того, що є ядром. І це пов'язано якраз із залежністю і взаємопроникненнями банківських систем, з тим, що бізнес, знов-таки, хочеться перейти до позитиву, і, як на мене, одним з позитивів є те, що бізнес, світовий бізнес в країнах і український, вони вже, переживши кризу, і в них є чітке розуміння, що ця криза ще не закінчилася і, можливо, і не скоро закінчиться. І тому і всі стратегії вибудовуються, виходячи з цього. І дуже багато говориться, що тут немає кредитування в Україні, там реального сектору, але ми подивимося, чи є це кредитування в Європі. І зараз, насправді, чому і погіршуються прогнози на наступний рік? Бо вони бачать, що погіршується стан економіки. І знов-таки, коли ми говоримо, надзвичайно важливо, коли країни проводять якісну макроекономічну політику. Але проблема конкурентоспроможності країн, без якісної макроекономічної політики конкурентоспроможність в довгостроковій перспективі неможлива. Але країни Європи стоять перед значними структурними проблемами, в тому числі, яким чином дозволити бути більше ринку. І якраз невирішеність, чому зараз концентрація на Франції? Бо просто бачать, що політики можуть проводжувати більш популістську політику, але чи призведе це до економічного зростання? І знов це певні виклики, маю надію, що на них знайдуть рішення. Але те, що зараз ситуація погіршується вже в ядрі європейської єврозони, Зрозуміло, що це не може не впливати, і чому оцінки всієї світової економіки, всієї торгівлі, вони знов погіршуються.
I was just going to say, I think that the problems in the core of the Eurozone may be stabilized a bit by the ECB's announcements that they will backstop countries that come to them for request assistance. I think that's, at least there's some positive move by the ECB now to potentially step in if necessary. But I would argue that as long as there are core problems in the likes of France and Germany, but in particular France, it's a concern and in and around the Eurozone, concern for Ukraine in particular, because 70% of the banking sector here is owned by European banks. And those banks are clearly not prioritizing Ukraine's welfare compared to their own home countries. And so I think that's a concern. And I think it points to the fact, to your point about homework, I think it points to the fact that Ukraine, if the average per capita income is $4,000, we have a lot of work to do. And if we have a lot of work to do, then we have to actually think about how to make Ukraine really the Dubai, not the Dubai, wrong one, the Singapore of Europe. I mean, if it's Poland, fine, but then we should follow it. I mean, it can't be that we are, because right now we're being led by the crisis in Europe, we're being led by other things, we're asking about good questions about what's happening in the US political system, but actually who cares? Because in a sense, if Ukraine doesn't get itself together to make itself forward-thinking and more presentable, it doesn't matter, because relative value-wise around the country, around the world, there are 20 things to invest in today, not 2 or 3. And I can speak Russian. I was thinking earlier that I should speak Russian in this panel, but at the same time, English is actually a very important fact about Ukraine. Many of my clients have some English speakers in their companies, but they don't, as a core management team, speak English well enough. Not all of them, but some of them. And I think the country in Ukraine, just as a small example, because this country has to market itself globally to everyone because there's no domestic capital to invest. There has to be brought in. There's some, but very limited domestic resources. This country and companies have to do much more about that, as opposed to waiting for the European banking sector to come and make loans. It has to be outward. And so I think there has to be a mentality change as well here, because we have to actively move outside of this crisis ourselves. We can't wait for it to happen. It's not going to happen around us, for us, as it were, as an American Ukrainian patriot that I am.
And just to add to that, we met at the Adam Smith Investment Summit in London, and for 2 years, 2011, 2012. And it was an interesting situation, just to strengthen actually your point. In 2011, there were 2 summits going simultaneously in London, one Malaysian and one Ukrainian. In Malaysia, Malaysian summit was represented personally by Prime Minister of Malaysia. Why? Because they care about every cent that comes in foreign direct investment. Ukrainian summit had to be represented by the Deputy Chief of Staff of President's administration, who never came because he or she was too busy. So it was by the way, like today, they're just not here, it was represented by Vladislav Kaskev, whom, of course, I love a lot. But look, it's just not a comparison with the Prime Minister of Malaysia. And the way it is done, it's ego and pride on the one hand, which actually hurts, and on the other hand, it's also understanding that they do not want to have too much competition in the sectors they control. They don't want to have too much foreign direct investment in the sectors that they politically control. That's as simple as that. And that is the homework. And that's why this is so tough, because it's not just, cosmetic, some kind of macroeconomic reforms would be important. But we are talking about fundamental, deep values that we have to do the homework yet.
Yeah, just $4,000 per capita income. $4,000. What country in Europe has better educated populace, more industrial capacity, and $4,000 per capita income?
Yeah. Talking about homework, what we've done in Turkey, we've been lucky with this single government that has stayed for 10 years in power. Because before that, for 20 years, we struggled with the same problems that you're struggling now. Corruption, and infrastructure problems and trust issues. So you have to earn the trust of foreign investors and local investors. And our government, luckily, has been very pro-industry. So we had 3, 4, 5 guys in the government, not more, that were supporting the financial industry and the other industries, and they were pro-foreign investment. So just these 3, 4 people worked hard and opened ways to foreign investors. And as I said in my speech, Turkey is one of the favorite venues of foreign investors. But locally, we couldn't get the same trust. And I think that will be the challenge here too, because Ukraine is a great country with a great potential, just like the potential we had maybe 5, 10 years ago for foreign investors. But locally, it will take you a long time, because the people here are a generation that lived through the 90s, through the 80s, just like me, and just like my colleagues. And for us, it will take a long time to change our way of thinking and to retrust our countries again. So that's the hard part. Getting the foreign investors is the easier.
And just a very short comment on that, because I really like that being in Malaysia. You know that the faction of the, Attila, you seem to be the supporter of the current government, so I had doubts whether I have to say this or not, but now I can say that. The faction of kind of modernist, Islamist opposition party in Malaysia are called Erdoganist. They call themselves Erdoganist. You know, where is Turkey and where is Malaysia? You know, far away. Of course, it's Islamic world, so they'll learn from each other. Well, first of all, 2 lessons. Number 1, we need some Erdoganists here as well. To learn from the model. And number 2, is hopefully that we will develop our own party in the future. I don't mean the political party, but the stream of thought and stream of reforms that will actually become the role model for the Eastern Europe in the future, because this country has this potential. It has a size that like Turkey has, to influence not just itself, but the region, at least the region around it.
And one more thing, sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I think this is a very good conversation. Also, for the first time in many years, during the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've been working as one unit, like the Turkish Industrialist Association, Capital Market Board of Turkey, Turkish Foreign Investment Directorate, Istanbul Stock Exchange. I am the chairman of the Turkish Capital Markets Association. Our association, companies, everyone, we acted together because the government just, provided the ground for us. Before that, Istanbul Stock Exchange was fighting with the Capital Market Board, and Capital Market Board was fighting with the Treasury, and Treasury was fighting with industrialists. So that somehow the stars became aligned, and that really helped us. That's probably one of the key issues.
Wow, it was really great discussion over the last question. Thank you all, and we're moving forward. And I want to bring a question of competition, of global competition and regional one. I did a few second homework and to give you a few figures, few numbers. For example, if you take emerging markets versus developed markets, they have emerging markets debt to GDP probably up to 60%, and most, I took BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China. If you take developed market, will be 80 to 150%. If you take emerging market growth of 5% approximately versus 1% for developed markets. If you take sovereign wealth funds, total assets under management are over $4 trillion US, actually 4.3 to be correct, and emerging market reserves are over $8 trillion US. You have inflows of fixed income inflows in emerging markets of over 200 billion since the crisis, since the end 2008, and actually emerging market corporate debt stock hit the record level, crossing $1 trillion for outstanding debt. So all this information leads to a simple question. So should we consider emerging markets to be a new safe haven, considering problems and issues we have in developed markets, or it's still too optimistic to say that?
Still a bit optimistic, I'd say. I think there is definitely a rebalancing of risks around the world, and it isn't fair to probably call emerging markets emerging anymore. In many respects, they've emerged. That's a different question, though, about safe haven status, because in the end, the difference between emerging markets bond issuers and corporate debt issuers in the more developed markets tends to be transparency, first of all, tends to be corporate governance, consistency. I think the major fundamental difference between emerging markets and the quote-unquote developed markets, and I think we do need some new names, I'm not sure what those are, but is the legal system. And the rule of law is fundamentally still, there is no precedent in many places, and Ukraine is included in that. If you have a bankruptcy and you go to court, you have no idea whether you're going to win or not. No idea. And there's no precedent to say you will or should, even if legally speaking, from what you understand, you should win. You don't know. And I think that's why there's a big difference between the competitive positions of emerging markets versus developed economies, because for the most part, the court system in London has many, many years of precedence. I mean, hundreds of years. So that's an extreme example, but still decades of, at least, of precedent. And I think that that's probably one of the most important aspects to encourage foreign investment in the Ukraine is to focus on issues of transparency and issues of legal system, and at a micro level in companies, issues of investor relations, consistency. And many companies do it, but I think more should.
I think we should be careful going forward about the supply-demand imbalances, because now we see a lot of demand for emerging market assets because of a lack of assets in developed countries. The yields are at all-time lows, and I don't know what will happen when these yields turn around, because what we see is in many emerging, including, let's say Turkey, our government bond yields are at an all-time low. Ever since I've been in the market, it's at an all-time low, and for the first time in decades, they are yielding a negative 1%. I mean, the real yield is minus 1%. Right? It's 6.5% bond yields, 7.5% inflation. So there is something wrong here. And also, just an example, we have a lot of private equity interest in Turkey. Just recently, two funds. Only two funds. There are many funds chasing assets in Turkey, private equities. Two funds raised $1 billion each to invest into Turkish companies. And my company is the leader in M&A transactions in Turkey. We do a lot of M&A transactions every year. So $1 billion means during the next 2-3 years, they have to invest, let's say, into 10 companies, right? On the average, maybe 7 to 10 companies. That means they have to find companies of $200 million each, right, of value, so that they invest, maybe, let's say 50%, $100 million tickets. There is no such thing. I mean, there aren't that many companies in Turkey where you can write a $100 million ticket, and there aren't 20 companies. And this is only two funds. So there is a big demand and supply misalignment, and that might increase, and when interest rates start going up, we might see major emerging market crashes. That's what I'm afraid of.
Andrei, I mean, talking about the safe haven, I mean, you must be kidding probably with overnight trades at 50% yesterday, and with devaluation almost imminent. I mean, look, by the way, it's good to have this water here on this table. You know the story, right? I mean, the company, as we speak now, is being raided right now, So, I mean, look, investment in Ukraine is kind of a midterm and long-term kind of game. I'm quite sure it's worth it, but let's be realistic. I mean, it's not the safe haven yet.
Thank you. My task is to provoke you for good answers. So,
Можу сказати, що в своїх оцінках, як працівник Національного банку, в уряді, і зараз зрозуміло, що і в прогнозах ми завжди виділяємо групи. Розвинуті країни, ринки, що розвиваються, але знову коли, тим більше ви, як інвестори, зрозуміло, що ви після цього кажете, ну, ринки, що розвиваються, да? Це одночасно і та ж сама Польща, да? І Угорщина, і Туреччина, і Росія, і Україна. І якщо ми подивимось на саме просте, на своп, на суверенний дефолт, я завжди пам'ятаю там оцінку, яка була значний час тому зроблена, коли Україну порівнювали і казали, чому Україна розглядається при найвеликому потенціалі, який є, ну це завжди великий потенціал, який, на жаль, не реалізовується. І чому вона є слабкішою, ніж Туреччина, да, чи і Росія. Є надзвичайно дуже добре дослідження Фіча по Росії, який показав, що насправді проблема не стільки там в сировинній спрямованості, хоча експортувати нафту і газ при цінах і ситуації, яка склалася на ці сировинні товари, ну, все ж таки є більш ефективно для країни, ніж продукцію там, металу, яка, ну, навіть не продукція, а сировину металеву. Але ключове зупиняє знов-таки в довірі до і в якості політичних інституцій. І от якраз приклад Туреччини якраз і свідчить. Да. Бо коли я почув і думав, отут сидів би Микола Янович, от я б сказав, бачите, от як добре, коли уряд працює 10 років. Да. Але після цього є друга половина, да, яка говорить, що треба мати чітку стратегію, сумісні цілі і завдання. І оця реалізація потенціалу. Ну, для мене, от як працівника Центрального банку, завжди було прикро бачити, що капітал, який був заведений банками європейськими, зараз всі ці роки виходить. Бо він насправді не знаходить свого застосування в цій країні. І він виходить не тому, що зараз там, ну, є, зрозуміло, певні кризи, які пов'язують необхідність, і ми пам'ятаємо кризу 98-го року, коли Корея, ну, вилучала всі активи для того, щоб, ну, спасати країну. Да. Зараз ситуація, ну, як на мене, для більшості банків немає, не настільки проблема спасання материнських структур, да, скільки чи є тут перспективи для використання в тих обсягах, які зараз були заведені. І знову ми повертаємося до чіткості і сумісності цілей і завдань, які дають довгострокову перспективу.
Дякую. Thank you. Maybe following question, it's maybe a little bit also provocative, but let's assume you have $1 billion US. In which emerging markets you would invest those, and maybe in which assets? If you don't mention Ukraine, no offense for me personally. Well, probably to each of you, it's just a small brainstorming to help to understand which countries you like. You know, it's a good point. When you put your own money, it's always the best indication of what you're really thinking.
I'll be bold to go for it. Well, at these levels, I
Turkey?
most likely wouldn't invest in Turkey because it's, as I said, I mean, the market value is already, I mean, the market is fairly priced. To be honest, I can't tell how the other markets are because my specialty is Turkey. But from the outside, the markets I like are like Brazil. I mean, they've done really great things in the past. India has their own problems, but again, it's a market, you know, that has this long-term growth potential. So probably these two markets would be, but I wouldn't put all $1 billion into these two. Yeah.
So we have $1 billion, we have 7-year time horizon. What's the term, you want it to return in through 6 months, or what's the?
Well, it's up to you. If I say 30 years, it would be no-brainer, but...
I mean, let's assume it's private equity for 7 years, because I think it's, you know, it's, I guess I would invest in sectors across a variety of emerging markets as opposed to one emerging market. So I think one of the sectors that's quite close to home for Ukraine is agriculture. And I think the next 10 to 20 years have very strong positive potential for agriculture. So I think, to take your point, I think investing in Brazil is a good idea. Investing in Ukraine is a good idea for agriculture. Investing in parts of Africa, although they're much less developed, still agriculture in Africa is something that's being considered in Ghana and other places. So obviously the Indian and the Chinese populations and the Middle Eastern populations are still growing rather explosively, especially in parts of the Middle East, and we've seen what that has caused in terms of economic stress. So I think agriculture is an interesting theme. You know, I also think some of the other consumer sectors are interesting if you consider the potential growth, again, in emerging markets, like the ones beyond the BRICS, as it were, the Vietnams of the world, the Indonesias of the world, and for that matter, Ukraine and other ones where per capita income is $4,000 a year. That means there's quite a lot of growth potential in a range of financial services and a range of consumer services as well. So I'm not sure I would invest in things like steel these days because there's a lot of capacity now, and China has produced a lot of capacity, and same with India. So I think it's more along the lines of I suppose consumer-focused situations, and I do think agriculture is quite an interesting sector.
Well, I think we're coming close to, probably we'll have a few more questions if we are done with this panel. I would ask probably about Ukraine. So what's your outlook? Do you think how many years it will take for Ukraine, well, to catch up with any neighbor country? Are you mostly on optimistic side or pessimistic, just at that?
Знов-таки, добра новина, що є кредитні історії. От є кредитні історії України, да, є кредитні історії в бізнесі. Да, і це ще не є запорука, що їх можна просто екстраполювати на майбутнє. Да. Але вибір для бізнесів, як на мене, насправді є. Зверніть увагу, що є бажання і великого капіталу зараз зайти і насправді ведуться. Є американські великі компанії, бо є ниші, яка влада, при тому, що вона надзвичайно вибудовує жорстку вертикаль, але є ниші і в Україні, да, для заходу в добичу газу, нефти, енергетичного, де зрозуміло, що своїх ресурсів немає. Звичайно, якщо говорити про Україну, є надзвичайно потужний сільськогосподарський, так, але тут є політична боротьба за цей ресурс. Є можливості безпосередньо транзитної і є насправді домовленості. І чому я знов з великим задоволенням прийняв за це запрошення, да, бо коли я зустрічаюся з аналітиками, я кажу, а скажіть мені, будь ласка, да, який є попит з боку аналітиків, особливо спільнот, да, і які є альтернативи програм і рішень, да, в фінансовому секторі чи в цілому, да, які б були і яким міг би скористатися бізнес для того, щоб примушувати політичну владу, да, приймати правильні рішення, які б давали насправді довгострокову перспективу. І от, на жаль, якби слабкість української сторони, да, вона і полягає в тому, що багато розумних, да, сильних і аналітиків, і бізнесменів, вони вже є, да, але альтернативи політиці, яку проводить або не проводить влада, їй, на жаль, до цього часу ще немає. Да. Тому я б завжди займався макроекономікою, я ніколи не займався бізнесом, але насправді Україна має надзвичайно великий потенціал, і не тільки Україна, і тут ціла низка країн прозвучала. Все залежить від того, наскільки вона цей потенціал буде реалізовувати.
Well, keeping my opinion on Ukraine's outlook on the morning after election, it was October 29th. I said, I mean, there are two major alternatives, and I give, let's talk as economists in terms of probability. So I say, unfortunately, it's only 20% probability that the current government, using its not a bad showing at the election, and it's 30% in the popular vote, as they say it, as a mandate to do the homework that we are talking about. It's only 20%. And I say, unfortunately, I kind of feel that the 80% probability that they will use this mandate to bulldoze the business and the country is the way they did in 2010. And again, this story shows that, I mean, the probabilities unfortunately work, I mean, the way kind of I predicted. However, this crisis, hopefully, and unfortunately we have to use this non-economic concept as hope, which dies last, is that this crisis will finally humble them down. I know that humility is not exactly the word they like and use, but will humble them down and will kind of remind them that 2015 in 2 years. So they will just have to realize that, as we all predicted back in 2010, this policy will not work. It just will not work because we all know it. It just will not work. And they know quite well, and we know quite well what policy works, because we look at Turkey, we look at Poland, we look at many other examples in the world, and we know, and by the way, they know what works. So they do. It's just the only thing, you know, acting on it. So hopefully this crisis will make them think, will make them humble down, maybe restructure, you know, the decisions that they need to restructure, and finally do the homework. With the crisis, I would say that the hope that the probability of this scenario goes up a bit.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we unfortunately ran out of time, though I think the session was very good, and that's what I was talking about, the thoughts, you know, things to think about. And my grand thank you to all the speakers. Thank you very much. We'll have a short break now, and then we'll continue with macroeconomics on Ukraine. So thank you very much, our speakers. Thank you.